Thanks for listening to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. You can contact Phil and Jon at their Twitter page at twitter.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast or their Facebook page at facebook.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast.
Good evening.
I am warning you right now, if you touch my drums, I will stab you in the neck with a knife.
Ain't a funky. Ain't a funky.
Mom!
Take it easy. Lower it.
I'm not gonna lower it. I have to do this now.
I don't mind you playing it, but lower it.
Everything is straightened out?
No, we had a problem. I mean, we tried to do everything we could.
What do you mean?
Well, you know what I mean.
Little trouble there. You're rushing.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
All right, here we are. We're back with episode number 2 because there were so many unanswered questions from episode number 1.
Yes. Let me first and foremost thank some of our dear friends for taking the time to listen and give us some incredible feedback. I really appreciate you sitting through Phil's therapy session disguised as our beta launch.
Hear, hear. Get ready for more, my fellow doctors.
Somehow I can charge him $150 an hour. I'd be a lot happier.
I've spent $150 in worse ways, I'll say that. But anyway, yeah, let's echo again what John just said. Thanks to all of our beta testers. We are continuing to fix some things. One of the most egregious things that we had our wrists slapped on, and rightfully so, was we had a lot of, shall we say in the business, plosives that I think we're fixing right now. We're trying a little bit of a new mic technique and some windscreens and whatnot, and John is glaring at my ham-fisted windscreen that I created. John, by the way, let me go ahead and say this. Let me tell you where this foam came from that's wrapped around this microphone. You know the old acrylite student cases?
I do.
I cut a square out of the bottom of one of those, and I took a rubber band and rubber banded it around this microphone. Are you jealous?
I am. You know, when I look at that, I see Athens instead of Atlanta. Oh. It's just so indie.
What if I said Austin?
I don't know, man.
More Athens?
I think, yeah, Athens to me rings of indie.
Yeah.
So you're the cool kid today.
Well, I'm thinking about keeping it, man. I ordered some windscreens for our other mics, but, you know.
It's got some character that you're going to have to trust me on, people, but it's a lot of fun.
You know, as they say, just because you are a character doesn't mean you have character, right?
I have 12 or 13 of them.
So. Well, speaking of therapy,
yeah,
right?
Get in line, John.
Yeah. But, and then kind of piggybacking on our beta tester folks and, you know, some of the things that we've gotten back. One thing that we kind of thought about in this first episode, and actually we're kind of bridging the gap and doing it again this week, is we got a lot of feedback from some folks that were really excited that even though this is a, you know, drum podcast, it's primarily, you know, geared toward drummers. The topic that we had last week was something that's universal to, you know, for all musicians to listen to. We had some folks that were, you know, excited about passing the podcast on to some of their fellow musicians to let them listen to it. And, you know, again, this week we're going to have a little bit of a universally acceptable topic, but never fear, drum nerds and gearheads. We will be doing some extremely drum-centric podcasts here in the future as well.
We are. That's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and with that in mind, please keep the feedback, the comments, the ideas, the suggestions coming along, and we will we'll get on it. So with that in mind, we're going to talk about this week's topic. And this is another one of these topics that we're going to help you get and keep gigs, hopefully, right, John?
That would be ideal.
So we're a service to you folks, as well as just being your weekly entertainment and punching bag.
You're welcome, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to talk about this week is we're going to talk about gig preparation.
Yes, sir.
And it's going to cover quite a few bases because there are a lot of different gigs out there, you know. We're going to talk about preparing for gigs that, that are with your current band. We're going to talk about preparing for gigs when you're a sub in an existing band. And we're also going to talk about preparing for these, what I like to call one-off style gigs. A lot of times they're reading gigs. There are things like award shows that you do. They could be Broadway shows that come through for like a 2 or 3 week run, that sort of thing.
All right, let's get to it.
John, one of the things that we'll kind of start off with is when you're preparing, especially for your current band, I always like to think in terms of those that, if you're going to be with this band for a while, this is something you need to commit to the memory banks. This is something that you want to learn, and you're going to keep these songs for a while. You're going to keep them, whether it be a specific arrangement or if it's a medley, a specific kind of medley. So one of the things that I like to do as far as like preparing for that is I like to make a little chart, keep a chart together as far as like for the whatever kind of arrangement, whether it be a medley or an individual song. And a lot of times with the bands that I work with, I will get like the proverbial rhythm chart, and a rhythm chart is kind of one of these things for you folks that are not exactly familiar with that term. It's kind of a catch-all chart that the entire band will use. It has the basic form of the song. It'll have chords on there. It will have also particular rhythmic hits, figures for the band. And what we do, or what I do, I should say, as a drummer, is I make little shorthanded notes and, that sort of thing on there. Basic grooves, tempo markings, groove changes, that sort of thing when we go from place to place. And then my method after that would be I try to use that chart for a limited period of time and then try to commit it to memory, because these are guys that I'm going to be playing with for a while.
Right.
And
I think it's on a lot of levels it's good, from a performance aspect, from a groove and focused aspect. You're really getting in the middle of a song and not just having your nose in a chart. In my long-term steady gig, it's a little different with the exception of a one-off tune, like for a first dance at a wedding, for example.
Absolutely.
That kind of thing. That might be a lead sheet.
Right.
Quick and dirty. But in regards to songs we learn and have the intention of keeping, there's actually specific charts for each instrument. So it's an arrangement, if you will, done. And that is awesome, and it also kind of can be a crutch in a way.
So, quick question, John. When you say specific charts, that means you actually get a drum chart.
An actual drum chart.
Nice.
And the guys who do the arrangements in the band are either knowledgeable in making really good and legible drum charts, or in one of their cases is actually a pretty good drummer, and that always helps too. But going back to the crutch thing, sometimes there's not a lot of preparation. I just sort of take it for granted. Hey, we're learning a new song. I might listen to it on the way to the gig, and I know there's going to be a great chart. And that's awesome. Let's not beat around the bush. That's awesome.
Right.
It's convenient. Even you're busy, you got a million things going on. But at the same time, it sort of can make you a little lazier. And I think in turn, maybe it just takes a little longer to kind of commit to memory, or you might leave it up there a little longer than you really need to, just as a psychological crutch. And
the old safety blanket.
There's good and bad to that.
Your musical
the leader of that band, prefers to have legitimate arrangements and specific charts for an instrument, because he is gracious enough to allow us to sub out, as you know, and have done admirably for me.
And let me say, I appreciate said drum charts because, to my knowledge, for the different the different types of bands that fit the ilk that you're talking about, you guys are the only ones that I'm aware of that have dedicated drum charts like that.
Yeah, there's a few bands here and there that do, but in general, it's kind of a thing of the past in a lot of ways. But awesome in that I've done this gig for 20 years now, and I mean, I was always a decent reader. Pretty, I could probably get through a big band gig without anybody dying at that level. But it more than anything, it kind of just keeps that part of my brain a little bit intact and a little bit up and running. And I try to look at that as that's a good thing,
Oh, it absolutely. I've said a million times, if I'm not reading actively on gigs, one of the things that keeps my reading up is the teaching that I do.
Oh,
even just that, you know what I mean? Just
great point.
Yeah, just that. But so another type of gig that I wanted to talk about is when you sub again because you touched on that just a second ago about when I've subbed for you, and likewise you've subbed for me, and my method of preparation when I'm subbing for a band is I try to get as much information, as much material, and as many details as possible from the band leader or the music director of that band. Right. And, naturally, if they've got charts, wow, fantastic. If not, then basically what I will do is I'll try to get as much information regarding the versions, of the songs that they do. And then I will kind of go about making my own, set of charts, my own set. And kind of what I will do is, and when I say my own charts on something like that, if they don't even have rhythm charts, I will literally take a spiral-bound notebook and I will start sketching out, just the most basic things regarding the song, as far as of course, forms, specific grooves, and of course if I can get the tempos, if they're going to slightly nudge them up or down, get that as well. And then one thing I'd like to say about this also, I consider this, if we consider this first part of preparation we talked about with our consistent bands, as far as the things, these are going to be committed to memory, this is what I would call my intermediate memory. In other words, what I will do is hopefully I'm going to go into this gig subbing for you or subbing for another friend of ours, and I'm going to kill it. Hopefully I'm going to do a great job, right? And hopefully get called back maybe the next time you're unavailable 6 months down the road. So I will try to keep this notebook, try to keep all my notes, try to keep all the different things that I have written down so that I don't have to start from ground zero again.
Right. I'm the
You know
same.
what I mean?
I have charts from gigs, even if it's a one-off singer-songwriter thing or a worship gig that I still have stacks of charts from everyone I've ever played with. Because two things happen with that. One is if they call you back, your job is a lot easier, obviously.
Yep.
But it also, it eases so much of that stress and it also shows that some respect towards that artist too. I kept these, and they might see it as, I kept these charts because I hope you called me back. Well, any little thing you can do to ease their mind, awesome.
And a little addition to that is sometimes, for example, if you're working with another band, or if you're subbing with a band, and let's say they're doing a cover of a song that your steady groups don't play. If you do one of these little half, ham-handed charts like we talked about, just to get you through these songs, you never know. Aside from playing with those people again, you might get a call with another band also. And you can, they do the same arrangement. And you can use that chart with a completely separate band. So that's another benefit of keeping a little running chart book, of that sort of thing.
Absolutely. I know my experience is, having lived in a few different cities too, it's almost like in cover bands, a lot of kind of crossover there with songs, things that just, and I've applied a chart from playing with one guy and to another gig, and it just made my life easier. One thing I would say that, it's a two-way street though, by way of preparation, in that I'm certainly blessed in that band that I play with if I sub someone out. Two things that make life easy. One is we do arrangements dead on to the record 99% of the time. Even tempos, very close, all that. That in itself makes things easy. But it also, the drum-specific charts. Most of my friends that I'm going to call for this gig happen to be monstrously groovy players that can read. So it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky in that sense. And so when I'm preparing you, when I prepared you for a gig not long ago, we talked about tempos and making sure you understood, hey, we're doing the remake of this.
Right.
Or, we do a live version of this. It's a little brighter or whatever. We're just talking about real specifics then. And it makes things really easy. So in preparing someone for a gig, I think we're so wrapped up in like, you got to prepare me. But man, return that favor and make it, show some respect to your peers, And,
you know what they say, John, the devil's in the details, right?
That's so true, man.
It's the kind of thing that one of the things I also try to get across to my students is that, when you're on a professional gig, when you're on a gig, you're trying to be a professional, especially as a student. The bare minimum that's expected for you is to play the notes on the page. You want to do more than that, man. You want to play music.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? The bare details are on the page. Do something with it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Interpret it. Play the right tempo. Play the right feel. Use the right vocabulary for that style of music. Absolutely. The devil's in the details.
Yeah, that's so true. I'll tell you, in this topic of preparedness, I'll forewarn you, we might be getting into my therapy session now. I've had a couple situations that are very challenging. And one in particular, I got called to play a gig in a genre that I just really have very little experience or exposure to. It was a country gig, and my contact was like, yeah, man, this is the details. Here's where it's at. Pays this. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, great. Well, let me get an idea, get me a set list. And because I'm a preparer, I'll dig in, and as much as a pain in the butt that can be, this was a band that definitely didn't have charts and all that. But I can at least chase down some reference and have an idea. And man, not only could I not get even a remotely skeletal set list of, hey, here's some standards I know we'll do.
Right.
I got one original song, an MP3 of one original song. And then in the banter between a few band members, they're just like more into joking about, why are you wearing me out? I don't have time to do this. You could tell it was a joke, but I'm watching this like, man, I'm telling you to give me these songs. I don't know a lot of this stuff. I'll put in the time. Never happened. I get to the gig. It's, fortunately the bass player had some background in drums, could communicate okay, but I felt like I was at 70% the whole gig. And more importantly, I never got called back. And psychologically, you're like, well, had I been given a chance, even if they didn't call me back, they just didn't dig it, that's fine. But at least I had a fighting chance, But I was so frustrated by that I was like, I'll never take that call again.
Sure.
That's just ridiculous.
Isn't it interesting that when you do get called, while we're still on the subject of subbing for something like this, that you get called by a band leader, and this is their band, this is their business, this is their profession, and there's this weird mindset that you sometimes, or it's a feeling, it's a vibe, that you care more about the gig than they do from the standpoint of like, man, I'm really trying to do right by you.
Mm-hmm.
And in turn, when you do right by them, you're doing right by yourself as well,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a frustrating thing for sure.
Yeah, I think we have to accept that a number of reasons, but there may be the simple fact that someone's just really crazy busy outside of running a band. Okay, hey, I get it, but you have a good idea what you're going to play. Just send a set list from a last gig, anything. Just make an effort there. But there's also the reality is, man, some people just take it for, hey, whatever, we'll get through it. It's no big deal. And some people might be more like-minded to us in that, no, man, I want to kill it.
That's a very deep subject as to why, certain people respond that way.
Mm-hmm.
We could probably talk for 30 minutes about that in itself. But there is, there's a weird air of, in some ways, of selfishness.
Indifference.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely.
With that. So, and then one other type of gig that I wanted to talk about, John, as far as like being able to prepare for a gig. This is the one that I will call it, you can purge your memory banks somewhat after this, because a lot of times these type of gigs that I'm talking about they are these one-off type entire shows or one-off entire type performances that you're going to play the entire show, and even if there are elements of that show that you play again, it's not going to be in the same order. It's not going to be the same thing. And like, for example, examples of that show would be, or those type of shows would be like the Broadway bus and truck shows, that come through. I've played a few of those.
Mm-hmm.
And also I play every year, I play an award show, a televised award show that it changes every year. It's basically like a regional version of the Tonys that I do, where I'm part of the house band.
Is that like a lot of walk-ons?
It's a lot, man. It's a lot of walk-ons and full like production numbers of entire theater groups. You know what I mean?
So you'll be doing some full-on Broadway numbers.
Absolutely, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Interesting.
And the one thing about those gigs that 95% of them will send you the charts or the book ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
That's a wonderful thing. And then you have to, but my mindset on those kind of gigs is I have to be a very task-oriented practicing guy. In other words, they're the kind of, they're very demanding shows. 95% of the time done with a conductor, done with cues. You know what I mean? You have to be on from the minute the show starts to the minute you finish, because things could change, and tempos change, blah blah blah. Things change at the drop of a hat.
Right.
And so you have to be very well prepared and know as much of the music as you possibly can. And so I think it's very important that when you work on something like that you are laser focused in on the task at hand. Be task oriented. Work on the things that need to be worked on. The double bass can be practiced at a later time.
Yeah, man. That's an interesting scenario, and it just person to person can be so different. When we get into this, some people are sort of like, whatever, man, it's just a cover gig, whatever, these kind of things. But we kind of get into what another subject we wanted to cover, which was sort of the rationalizations for not being prepared. And we had a conversation not long ago that was fascinating to me, and I'm going to kind of put you on the spot about when you were younger and your mindset about preparing for a gig, and if you wouldn't mind sharing some of that.
Sure. Is this therapy?
No, this is just I like seeing you squirm. And that's all it is.
Well,
we should go video because it's fascinating. He starts twitching and grinding his teeth, but anyway, just putting you on the spot because I'm a jerk like that.
Well, John, this is the podcast that's fueled on coffee and crippling self-doubt, right? You know?
Yeah, and
So-
why you're here, I don't know, because I could just pretty much cover that subject endlessly.
Well, the conversation that you and I had not long ago had to deal with. It had to deal with. I was a terrible preparer years ago, and it caused a lot of damage with me from the standpoint of like I wasn't enjoying playing, I wasn't enjoying what I was doing, and
Just stressful.
yeah, I put a lot of stress on myself by not. But there's a weird kind of a vicious cycle. I put a lot of stress on myself because I was thinking that preparing was too stressful, or that it was too much to ask. Isn't that a weird thing? You know?
Yeah. But
And I thought for a while, how did I arrive at that? What kind of weird pretzel logic is that? You know what I mean? How did I get here? And you know, what happened was basically this. When I was a kid and ended up going to school, I was the proverbial nobody in school, and rather quickly I worked my way up the ranks of being the big fish in a small pond. And man, I was on scholarships, and I was in all the top bands, all the top small groups. I was working like crazy. And, you know, with that, you get a reputation of like, this is the hot student. This is the guy in town you got to call. And when I finished with my undergraduate degree, quite honestly, man, every graduate school I applied to, I got accepted in. And man, I wasn't going to, I was shopping for the best deal, man, going to graduate school. You know what I mean? I not only did I want to be the graduate assistant, but I wanted to get the best deal money-wise. You know what I mean? So, I mean, that feeds into this kind of hubris. When I was studying back then, I was, you know, a jazz performance major. 95% of everything I was playing was straight ahead jazz. And I was successful at it. You know, that's all I did for years, man, was play that stuff. And so when you combine the fact of being this hot shot sort of student and everybody telling you that you're great, and then you're playing a music that it's improvised, then the mindset becomes, I'm going to wing it, man. I've got enough chops, man. I have enough chops that I can go in and play anything.
I'm an improviser.
Yeah, I'm an improviser, man. I can go in and do this stuff. And, you know, with that kind of mentality, you get into that weird thing of like, well, this job only pays this much, so I'm not getting paid to prepare, man. You know, I'm not getting paid to prepare this stuff, so I'm gonna roll into this gig, and they're gonna get what they get. And that's where that's where my mindset was until I came to this realization that, man, I was driving to gigs having, for lack of a better term, panic attacks. And I used to think, oh man, it's just, you know, it's these things of like, you know, I just want to be on time, you know. Well, that was part of it, you know, part of the anxiety of that. But the real anxiety, man, was going on these gigs being unprepared. Blissfully unprepared, actually, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was causing a lot of issues. And then I guess maturity comes along.
Oh, apparently.
Yeah. You know? And maturity came along, and I started finding value in being prepared.
Man, it is so valuable.
Yeah.
I know. It's funny how you talk about the thing that really fascinated me about that whole time in your life was I'm an improviser. That really stuck with me. I'm an improviser.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've never in any way, shape, or form felt that way as a player. Like I'm like, you know, my whole thing is know what you can do, play to your strengths, be prepared. I literally, I think if you heard a tape of me 20 years ago playing a song that I play now, I might even play the same fills.
That's
and
interesting, man.
My mindset is kind of like, man, I want to be the rock. I don't want to throw anybody a surprise. I want to just be that foundation that everybody is just, they know I'm just there. It's going to be locked in, and there's not going to be any, and part of that is my laziness in that, you know, I've never been a practicer. My technique is horrible. It's about it's kind of more than just, you know, when I say play to your strengths, you know, even to the point where, like, I've been really smart in that I won't take a gig I'm not right for. Like, you're not going to see me on some Michelle Camillo inspired Latin gig. You know, it's just not going to,
Sure.
I've always made sure, no, you be in your,
Right.
in your vibe and your thing, and you play to your strengths in that. And so preparing has always been something that I've embraced, because I wanted to be comfortable and be that foundation. But more importantly, what is so funny about, you're talking about how it's this vicious cycle. Mm-hmm. I'm the laziest procrastinator ever. So I create stress not by not wanting to prepare, just actually getting to it. And then last second, like, you know. So there's certain, you know, it can be many different ways you create stress by way of a gig. But the end result of this, we hope, is that you embrace preparing and
absolutely
use that to your advantage.
You know, and John, here's the other weird talk about, again, another oxymoron, or just, again, pretzel logic, crazy stuff, is that when I had that mindset of I'm not going to prepare, I'm just going to go out and wing it on this gig, man, I was a practicing fool. As far as, like, you know, being this kind of, you know, practicing methods, practicing technique, that kind of stuff, you know, but not the gig. Isn't that weird?
It's like, where did that come from? How did that develop? When you're so dedicated to the craft of playing.
Yep.
But then in the situation where you can apply it, you're kind of indifferent. Mm-hmm. It's incredible. And I thank God for you getting past that, because not only did it benefit you professionally on a lot of levels, you know, reputation and playing, all that, but it also, you know, you more than anybody I know, you know, really kind of reinvented themselves in a certain way. We talked about, you know, when I moved to Atlanta 20 years ago, Phil Smith, straight ahead guy, you know, great, sounded great. I like it. Yeah, cool. That's awesome. Never would have thought twice about calling you for a gig I'm doing.
Yeah.
You know, like, it just didn't even compute. But you know, getting past that mentality and that immaturity, for lack of better terms, certainly, I mean, you're a perfect example of why you don't want to get wrapped up in that to begin with, because where you've gone in letting go of all that and what it's allowed you to do is amazing.
You know, and wrapped up in this entire thing, what we talked about, there's basically every human has got some modicum of self-sabotage.
Oh, of course.
You know, in their being, in their psyche, and it just manifests in different ways, whether it's procrastination or my thing of not preparing, you know, for a while. I think everybody has that in some form or another.
Yeah, I wonder, like, if my technique, you know, it sucks so bad because I don't want to be expected to play at a certain level. No, man, if you know, I'm not going to get called for that Burning Jazz gig, you know. Thank God I didn't practice. I don't have the stress of that high level improvisational gig.
Well, at this stage of the game, man, I feel like, you were talking about how I've reinvented myself. I haven't. It's so weird, man. I haven't really played what I would consider to be, you know, on a serious high level of straight ahead, you know, jazz. And God, man, probably 12, 13 years.
It's amazing. Yeah, I would have assumed you still do.
Not really, man.
But then again, man, in those circles and you know, there's something to be said too for. I've had this conversation with a couple friends where straight ahead more than any other style or art form even. It's like, man, you have to live that music because we are worshiping at the altar of the best of the best. Tony and Elvin and Philly Joe and then if you don't live that, well, we're probably never going to play at that level, no matter how dedicated. But if you don't live that music and just immerse yourself in it, it's a really tough thing because you're hearing things at this level, you're wanting to play at that level, but you can't just sort of like every few months go in and so that's a real it's just a besides the respect I have for people that are really dedicated to that and play at that level, it's something that I don't think you should just kind of brush off as like, whatever.
Well, yeah. Aside from this, I never like to say that the technique of playing jazz is more difficult. I think it's a little more sophisticated. I think it's that. But man, the vocabulary that you need to be able to play that music authentically is significant, in my opinion, significantly deeper.
Oh, no question.
You know, and so it's just like a language. You know, if you don't use that language, or if you don't use it, you know, very often, man, you lose a lot of the ability to speak it correctly.
Sure.
And that's where I feel like I could conjure it back up, but I mean, I'm fortunately busy enough right now to where I don't necessarily have to depend on it, so to speak.
Well, there could also be, you know, as in 10 years, you might feel wholly different and be like, man, I'd just love to do some low-key trio gigs now and get back to my roots. And, you know, they're nice and easy and they're not physically demanding. Or, you know, so there's some, and you know, the other beauty of jazz is you can be an old guy and that's pretty cool.
That is very cool.
Versus
the aging hipster
nightmare that is the modern.
You turn into a Steely Dan song.
Yeah, that's it.
You know. So, but you know, one of the things about preparing also that you and I are, I mean, we're in lockstep on this, is that regardless of what kind of gig you're on, if you are preparing. And if you are prepared, that's one of the only things that you really have control of on that gig is of yourself. You know what I mean? Being able to be, you know, prepared, and you can control what you're doing.
That's a great point.
You know,
there's so many hurdles that can present
variables,
themselves,
man. Yeah,
you know, and variables. Yeah, that do yourself the favor of that, because, I mean, it could even be something as silly as getting caught in traffic and that stress and that anxiety. And when you get to the gig, at least, man, your due diligence is going to help you to relax on some level.
Right. Absolutely.
So that is just invaluable, you know, for any of us to keep in mind and to really embrace.
So, John, now that we've kind of covered a little bit about various gigs, you know, different kinds of gigs to prepare for, how you kind of prepare for them, the mentality of, you know, how long you want to hold this stuff in your brain. And we've talked about my bad habits and getting over that kind of stuff. Let's play like the quick word association now, or at least just some kind of bullet points on some things as far as like just, you know, some of the basic things on how you want to prepare for the gigs. And so these things are common sense, right? But a lot of times, you know, people fall into bad habits, right? And sometimes you need to be, you know, reminded of the obvious, right?
Yes, sir.
And so a few of the things, again, we'll probably repeat ourselves a little bit on some of this, but the first thing is ask for the materials. Ask for things like charts. Ask for MP3s. Get information about the versions that you're playing, right? Get tempos, that sort of thing.
And don't stop asking.
That's right.
Because sometimes it's going to take that. And as annoying as it is, you have to just stay on it and be committed to getting anything you can.
Sometimes squeaky wheel gets a greasing, right? You know? And then, like I mentioned also earlier, when you start preparing for these gigs, get focused, be task oriented, practice the things that need to be practiced, right? And again, one of the things I'll tell students in particular is, for example, let's say you're working on a medley, right? Let's say you're working on something that's a 7-minute medley of 4 songs that are strung together. Chances are, man, the things that are going to trip you up are the hot spots of where you make the segues, right? Practice that stuff. Make sure you practice the things that need to be practiced, because one thing that I think it's a universal problem that all musicians have is a lot of times when we practice, we'll fall into a trap of practicing things we already practice or already sound good on. And I mean, you're not really even. I think where the psyche comes in that is that even when we're alone, we want to sound good, but you've gotta be focused enough and have enough discipline to work on the things that need working on. Sound sad in the practice room, not with the band, so to speak. So I think that's a very important thing. Practice the things that need the practice on, not the stuff that that you already sound good on. And then one of the things is also be very aware of definitive versions of standard material. And we kind of hit on that a little bit earlier as well.
There's a lot of opinions about that, by all means, but there really is sort of some unwritten things. Like, I know, though I'm not immersed in jazz world, I know enough that there's certain versions that,
absolutely,
if it's a thrown together gig, you're going to kind of, an intro or an ending or, how things play out. There's definitely
right.
And you can ask people what it is, there's...
Well, these definitive versions, we have them in all different genres of music, right? And one of the things that also I'll just briefly touch on when it comes to preparation, there's one little part that you can't rush it very much, and that's the experience aspect. You can kind of goose it along a little bit by doing as much homework as possible. Some of the experience comes from being on the gig, of course, and whatnot. But these definitive versions a lot of times come with experience of listening to songs and being put on the bandstand in different ways, and then learning these definitive versions. But like a couple of examples of like a rock tune and say a jazz tune that have these definitive versions is like, for example, if you were on a like you said, a little thrown together jazz trio gig or something like that, if the leader calls if I were let me say, how about Someday My Prince Will Come?
Okay.
All right. Pretty much the definitive version on that is the Miles quintet version, right, where they pedal that one chord at the beginning for a long time. If you only know the Keith Jarrett Trio Standards version, I mean, that's as hip as it's going to get, man. But probably not going to be that.
I think about things like on a straight ahead gig, like Autumn Leaves. There's that ever popular intro that there's a lot of people have no idea about.
Right.
They think they're starting at the head.
Absolutely.
And there's an example of something that I live in fear of. So I bring up, like if I'm on a straight ahead gig and everyone's assuming I'd know something like that. Well, I don't. Or they just call a tune like some maybe more obscure Latin tune.
Right.
Well, I'll even tell someone like, man, tell me if it's Latin. Tell me if it's awesome.
Sure.
Don't assume I know anything and all that. But
well, there are times also...
communicate that.
Right, exactly. There are also times that, and this is not a definitive version, but there will be times that guys will play... There are a million different ways. Like you said, you could play Autumn Leaves as a bossa nova. Play it as a samba. Sometimes if you're subbing in or throwing something together like that, the piano player might just, he's played it a million times that specific way and just does it that way. And so, it is important to communicate it. Although sometimes, they can just start playing it and you get all of a sudden the antenna goes off. Well, this ain't swing.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden you roll with it. You kind of roll with the flow.
Improvise.
Improvise.
Awesome.
I used to do that.
Yeah. Well, if the next gig I'm on that's improvisational, I'm going to just call you to come rescue me. Phil, get down here.
you know, to kind of button up that thing about the definitive versions, like a couple, you know, there are quite a few rock tunes as well that have these definitive versions. Twist and Shout, believe it or not, was not written by the Beatles, but that's the one you're going to play.
It's pretty safe that's
you know
what's to be expected.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, you might like the Isley Brothers better, but actually they didn't even write that. They're not even the original. You know.
Yeah, there's definitely, that's a great example of what we're talking about here.
John, did you know that Devo didn't write Satisfaction?
That's a bunch of crap. Of course they did.
That's what I thought too.
Come on.
You know, but anyway, I would prefer. Yeah, and then just a few other things. You know, as far as gig preparation, we've been talking about musical stuff. You know, 90% of the things talk about musically preparing for a gig, but then you've got the other so-called brain dead details. Make sure you have the right gear. Make sure you load it up, you know, ahead of time. Plan your route ahead of time.
Where you're going, yes.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Because the thing is that most of us, if you're a professional musician, you're living in a big city.
Yep.
And, I mean, prepare your route. Be early. Don't put that stress, man, on you of what I used to do. You know, I'm going to get there the last minute. I'm not getting paid to be there early.
Oh, that's, yeah.
You know?
I'm way over that, man. Give me plenty of time and let my mind relax.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that, I mean, just, you know, they're even more into detail. Like, if you haven't played a venue, put it out on Facebook. Hey, man, I'm playing this hotel. I've never loaded in. Anybody got a clue? Mm-hmm. It's incredible. Like, 3 guys will pipe in right away. Yeah, do this, park here, roll this way. You know, I mean, just all that stuff can eliminate so much and allow you to focus on what is important, which is making music.
Thanks, John. You just blew my Shark Tank idea.
Oh.
I was going to do an app for that.
Well, that involves writing code, so it was a pipe dream anyway, drummer boy.
That it was. John, any last thoughts on this before we take off in a completely different, before we spin the wheels and, you know, do a 180?
I think more than anything, just professionalism, man. It goes so far in your reputation and getting called back and having, you know, gigs that you're keeping, maintaining. I joke a lot about my crappy technique and my, you know, inability to do this and that, but man, I get hired for consistency, showing up on time, you know, not being inappropriate, being prepared. I get hired for that. You know, like, you have, no matter how good you are, you have to have that together. Mm-hmm. And it should be your focus on every gig, no matter what it is, no matter who it's for, no matter what it pays. If you accepted it, have it together, man. Be a pro on every level. And that's something that, man, I mean, it has definitely served me well in that I'm not as dedicated to my instrument and the craft as many people, but man, there's a lot of people that like a guy who's consistent and likes a guy who no surprises. So that there's things that I can't stress enough. And, you know, by all means, that's not to say, hey, don't practice, because if you show up on time, you're good. I'm just saying that's part of the picture.
Well, you know, one of the things that I think a lot of young drummers, and I was guilty of this somewhat also, is that a lot of young drummers love the chops guys. They love the guys that blow chops. As they say in the business, we're chopping out. When the rubber meets the road, we're accompanists. And if you don't have that down, you're going to be doing clinic tours.
Yeah.
You're not going to be playing with people. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so, I mean, it's the kind of thing, man, that we are accompanists first and foremost. And let me tell you, anytime when I describe Jon to friends of mine or other musicians that may not know him, there's this when they talk about just how a drummer plays or whatever, there's an old thing that when I was in Memphis that we used to say, this guy plays his drums on the bacon side of the beat. And that's what Jon does. I mean, he flat out lays it down. He is the primo accompanist, man. And I mean that with, the utmost highest compliment.
It's very kind.
Yeah.
I just think that if you're serious about a career, your chops and your hands and it's kind of way down the list.
Yeah.
There's just so many more important variables, and
I'll take a good preparer over massive chops any day of the week.
Definitely.
Any day of the week.
Yeah, and most people are going to feel that way, especially ones charging a client $10,000 for a gig, or paying you $500 for a gig. They're not worried about that inverted goofadiddle, over 7/8 or whatever it is you're practicing. And I'm not poo-pooing any of that. Please know that, man. I respect to no end guys who are really into the deep end of drumming and all that, but working and cementing your reputation, a lot of what we've talked about is going to be far more important in sustaining a career. More
important than bringing your double bass kit and your inverted chinas on each side?
I'm going to need 2 or 3 episodes to answer that, because I've got to think about it for a while. So I'll answer that question later, like episode 5 maybe.
If we make it that far.
Yeah. I might just bail on all this and work on my double bass chops. So
the traffic could actually scuttle this podcast, speaking of.
Know your route, leave early.
Yeah.
I'm not getting paid a dime for this, but I was stressing about showing up late last week.
Jon, I'll see if I can get you a raise, man.
I like it.
For this gig.
A second cup of coffee, that would be a raise.
Absolutely. So anyway, I think we've kind of hit the hot spots on this, right?
Yes, sir.
So, well, if you recall last week, we had a little segment at the end of the show where we talked about these couple of great underappreciated drummers. And so we mentioned that we're going to try to do different segments each week, sometimes maybe a couple of segments. And so Jon and I, we're going to introduce a new segment today to finish up the podcast. And what we discussed we want to talk about today is we're going to talk about kind of the MVP of your drum set. So we're going to talk a little bit of gear-related stuff. So singers and saxophone players, you can switch it off now, I suppose, if you want to. Yeah. But yeah, so we want to talk about what we think is very important to us. And I'll go ahead and start off. And I'm gonna be just like dead honest with you. When we first started about this, Jon and I had the exact same thing in mind. So he was gracious enough to let me have this one, and he's gonna fly off the handle on something else here in a minute. But I'm gonna go ahead and tell you right now, man, my pick on this is as unsexy as it gets. It's not gonna be some crazy pedal. It's not gonna be some, super high end something. It's gonna be the drum throne. That's the MVP of my kit, man.
No question.
Yeah.
I can't give a counter argument to any piece of gear other than that.
And basically, the reason behind this, and this is, again, I've kind of brought students into this a little bit, but whenever I have a student that will, want to end up buying a pro-level drum kit, and they ask my suggestions as far as, like, what to get, man, I don't want to say I shut them down, but what I'll basically end up saying is like, whatever you want to get is fine. Make sure you buy a really good, high-end, sturdy, dependable drum throne that you like sitting on. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because if you're not comfortable sitting on that, man, it doesn't matter what drums you buy. And, man, I just thought of this. Perfect. I've got a perfect story for this. You and I do these things where we do these fly-out gigs from time to time, and we are dependent upon backline. Okay, well, for guys that haven't done this before, basically what ends up happening is you have a rider, you send it to a client, and the client sends it to a backline company, or you send it directly to a backline company. It's got all your wishes on it. This is the kind of drum set that I want. These are the sizes that I want. These are the cymbals that I want, blah, blah, blah. I was on tour. I was in South America. I was in Brazil. And I remember I was in Rio, actually, was where I was. I had done a series of gigs prior to that, and I had some equipment that we'll say was less than desirable. I was less than gratified, John, coming to some of these gigs, right? I got to Rio, and I walked into this theater, and man, I saw it. I mean, it was the proverbial, there was the spotlight, there was the halo over this drum set. Man, it was the correct sizes, everything. It was it was a Sonor designer drum set that was sitting up there.
Nice.
Right? Man, I got up there, and behind the set was one of these thrones that had, I'm trying to describe this. I want to do this justice. It was one of these thrones that it was a tripod that had one really super thick piece of tubing that bent backward, and then it had these two flimsy kind of fold out legs on front.
Kind of an old Ludwig Porta throne. Design.
Exactly. And the height adjustment was done, the main post that the seat attached to just had these holes where you would you would take the bolt and the carriage bolt with and adjust it, and it was so like mangled and ganked up that you couldn't even pull the height adjustment tube out of the base of this throne. And then it was like this little tiny flimsy seat that was like half bolted on. Miserable, man. I had a great set to play on. And so there's the story of buy a really nice drum throne, something that you like, definitely. Something that's comfortable, and something that's going to last. I've got 3 or 4 drum thrones that stay with different sets, that go around. They're all very similar. Most of them are 20 and 25 years old. Just a testament to the quality of them.
Yep.
So that's my spiel on that. Buy a good throne.
I'm fascinated that a Brazilian backline company delivered a throne to a gig I did in Hawaii. Because that exact throne, I'm pretty sure, was set up. And here's what's funny about that. And what reminded me that you'll never convince me that throne is not the most important thing otherwise. This gig was the better part of 2 hours sitting doing walk-ups for like an awards thing.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And then an hour and a half set after that of, like get the party going kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And I was wrecked for a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just beyond, and it's just, obviously as you get older too, man, it's like, the drum throne is kind of like the equivalent of like, therapeutic shoes for old men.
Tires on a car.
Yeah, you're gonna just invest in what you need.
I got to say also, John, to show you how my mind works. When you said when you were talking about that gig in Rio versus you, I thought you were going to say, how did a great set of German drums get to Brazil? And I was about to go in a totally different direction.
No, sir. No. I rarely get bothered by whatever drums are provided.
Yeah.
Just because it is what it is, and more than likely you're going to be tuning them anyway. So it's like, whatever.
I was about to get into a World War II reference here, man.
No, sir. No, I will not allow that.
John, what do you got, man?
What's that?
What do you got for your gear?
My throne is I have 2 rock and sock hydraulics. The Give for long gigs is really, when I initially bought them 15 years ago, it made all the difference in the world. And then I've developed some problems where my tailbone was really bothering me after gigs. And so I bought the Ahead version of the throne with the channel in between.
Yeah.
And it immediately, the first gig I used it on, I had no pain and was just beside myself. My dear, beautiful wife bought that for my birthday. And it was the best gift I've ever been given because it made all the difference in the world. So starting out with the hydraulic and the give and that, and then in addition adding the top that works for me.
Oh yeah.
Is incredible. Like my fatigue factor and everything on down has lessened.
You know, I have two of the same ones that you're talking about, and I also, and this is just for pure ergonomics and carrying, I've got for some of my small kits and stuff that where I'm really, because I mean with those kits we're talking about, you know, you have to take the throne top off, take the back off and the base and all, and so they're, you know, those in themselves are a little bit more cumbersome, so to speak. Right. I've actually got a couple of the old, and one of them is 30 year, probably 35 years old. Those old Tama Titan screw top. You know what I mean? Those things. I've got two of those, man.
I had one of those for years.
Yeah. I
finally got torn up enough. I had to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. That, you know, I can think of 3 or 4 other drummers I kind of grew up with that had that same tone too. Like Tama just had a run with their hardware and their, you know, back when we could carry heavy stuff. They were kind of on top of the game there.
John, I don't have a counterweight anywhere on my being right now.
I don't need one. I could, every gig I do, regardless of velocity, I could use flat bass stands because my cymbals are so low from my worthless shoulders that nothing's falling over. It doesn't matter.
All right, so there's my pick. My pick for the MVP is a throne, and
invest in it.
John, what's your MVP?
Well, I just really can't top that, so I'm gonna just say, the throne is the most important purchase you can make. I do know that I've had discussions with drummers about, you know, your snare drum, and that's the heart of your sound. Well, then you're getting into, you know, preference versus common, you know, sense and your physical well-being. Ride cymbals for me, that's a tough one. I think we're kind of neurotic in that we're always thinking we're going to find the perfect ride cymbal, even though we might have 3 or 4 of the perfect ride cymbal.
Oh yeah,
we just keep searching, and I'm a gear guy, so I love that. But we had talked about not at one point we talked about hi-hats are a real difficult thing in that might be my next most important thing. And the reason being is more than any other piece of gear, I think they have to feel right. And that again is subjective and personal, but man, if they don't feel right, because you're doing so many different things with a hi-hat in how you hit that, how you approach it, what stick you use, what, you know, do you use a lot of foot and all that. So hi-hats are one that I would go out of my way to really find what almost feels like an extension of your body there. And it's got to just feel effortless and natural and sound right and all that. That's a difficult one to find, but I as time goes on, hi-hats are one that,
I mean, if you think about it, man, as far as hi-hats being the MVP, again, it is, man, that's a heck of an argument, because how many songs, regardless of genre, even if they're not the focal point, like if you're playing a straight ahead thing, you're still playing hi-hat on 2 and 4 or some kind of comping figure with it. It is, man, hi-hat is played on every tune.
Yeah. Well, one might argue that the kick pedal then factors in as well.
Yeah.
But, you know, we can get into all that later.
Yeah.
But, hi-hats are probably my little, what would you call it? Second place. Silver medal.
All right, silver medal.
This.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and you know, buying, as far as that goes, again, like you said, hi-hats are subjective from the standpoint of everybody's going to hear something a little bit differently. It's going to feel a little bit differently on that. But I think we'll both agree also that much like when you're talking about drum thrones, Get something that is of quality. Oh, man. Right? I mean, you're going to play it on every single song.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than a cheap, bad sounding set of hi-hats to just get you less than excited about the rest of the gig.
And you want to make sure you're preparing.
Please do that.
Prepare with those new hi-hats and sturdy throne. Well, John, you got anything else you want to add today?
You know, I think we really touched on something that is just so important to, you know, career and reputation and, you know, the idea of creating less stress and all that I'd just like to kind of let that stew and let people really think about what they can do to kind of get in that place and embrace it. And I just encourage you to do that. I mean, it's going to be a lifelong positive and rewarding mindset and approach. Well, I promise you.
Oh, absolutely. I can tell you this, man. You know, if you think about the whole art, so to speak, of preparation and the whole task of preparation, you know, it sounds like a lot of work, and it is a lot of work, but it is the best work you will do from the standpoint of easing your mind, letting you enjoy the gig for what it is. And I mean, you know, none of us started playing drums as oh, this is a chore. It's going to be fun. Right. We want to have fun. We want to enjoy what we're doing. And so learn to embrace the process.
I agree. I think if you look at all of that negatively, it's going to haunt you. You know, you're going to not get called back. Or, you know, a perfect example in a sub situation, there are a number of people on that gig that might be the first time they hear you, and their impression of you could be, it just wasn't that happening.
Yep.
Wasn't that together? Oh, I didn't have a handle on it. And there are people that just assume you know their version and their songs and all that. Do everything you can to make that impression positive, because they might mention you to someone else. They might call you back. You know, they might recommend you for a gig that becomes yours that you just absolutely were made for.
Yeah.
That's so much, you know, it's wide open, but you owe it to yourself to embrace preparation, and I promise you will benefit from it.
Man, I'm going to leave it at that. I mean, I think that's exactly, that kind of encapsulates the entire episode, you know. So, all right, guys. Well, we really, again, appreciate, you know, you guys listening to this, your feedback. Feel free to, if you want to, again, give us any feedback. If you want to talk about this podcast, if you got any ideas, if you want to amplify anything that we talked about, we've got a new email address. It's drummersweeklygroovecast@gmail.com. And then, of course, there's always our Twitter page, Drummers Weekly Groovecast, and Facebook page, Drummers Weekly Groovecast. And until then, we will talk to you guys next week. See you later.
Keep it in the pocket, you hear?